The Quarterly, Lamentations, Song of Songs, Ecclesiastes. Lesson 9, Ecclesiastes 1, An Incomprehensible World. The Book of Ecclesiastes is known for its apparently pessimistic message that all of life is meaningless and there's no ultimate reward for all of a person's arduous labors. Some people therefore avoid the book as a depressing read, while others are drawn to its realistic view of life in a difficult world, as a counter to the relentlessly upbeat message of so much of surrounding culture. The primary focus of the book is to answer the question of how to live well in a world that is under God's curse because of sin, see Genesis 3, in which our labors and our pleasures are transitory and insufficient to satisfy us, and the flow of events is utterly beyond our comprehension. It encourages us to enjoy the good gifts that God gives us, while fearing and obeying the God who made us, acknowledging that there is much that we cannot understand. The author often presses us to consider where our presuppositions logically lead us, and shows us the emptiness of every view of the world that claims to understand it without reference to God. The interpreter's challenge is to do justice to both themes, the negative, everything is temporary and incomprehensible theme, alongside the enjoy the pleasures of life that God gives theme, without allowing either theme to swallow up the other. The author of the book is named as Kohelet, or teacher or preacher, as the ESV has it, who also identifies himself as a son of David, king in Jerusalem, chapter 1, verse 1. This has naturally led many to suggest Solomon as the author. Solomon certainly had the time and the resources to pursue every kind of pleasure and satisfaction in the way that is described in the first section of the book. However, the Hebrew of the book seems to belong to a later time, well after the exile, and the fact that the author does not specifically call himself Solomon leaves open the question of whether it was actually written by a later author, who under the inspiration of God adopted the voice of a Solomon-like figure. After all, the preacher claims to have surpassed in wisdom everyone who ruled Jerusalem before him, chapter 1, verse 16, which in Solomon's case only covers David and the preceding Jebusite kings, who had no reputation for great wisdom in the biblical text. Verse 2 sets the tone for the whole book, introducing the key word hevel, which the ESV renders as vanity, but a word that is difficult to translate into English. It combines the elusiveness of meaning in life with its short nature and frustrating aspects, and is explored more in the Teacher's Guide. It's the name given in Genesis 4 to Cain's brother, who we call Abel, whose short life and senseless slaying epitomize the meaning of the word. We live in a world that is under God's curse, where things are not as they should be, and injustice often seems to reign. And that's an aspect of reality that the preacher tries to take seriously. Given this assessment of life, there are some hard questions to be asked, even if we can't always find the answers. One of those questions is found in verse 3. What does man gain from all the toil of which he toils under the sun? People work hard in this fallen world, but what are they working for? What does all that effort gain for them? Life under the sun is another prominent theme in the book. It describes living in a created and cursed world in all of its complexity. Some interpreters want to limit under the sun to a life without God, but believers too live under the sun. We also experience the frustrations, confusions, and challenges of a life that is short, not under our control, and often doesn't make sense to us. Verses 4 through 11 ponder the circular nature of so much in nature and history. In the natural world, there are many repeated cycles. The sun rises and sets, only to follow the same course the next day, verse 5. The wind blows one way and then in the opposite direction, but it never stops blowing because all the air is where it's supposed to be, verse 6. The rivers run down to the sea. But the sea doesn't gradually fill up. Somehow it returns again to the source of the streams. Verse 7. And history seems to follow a similar pattern. Generations come and go over a very short period of time in comparison to the enduring mountains and seas. Verse 4. Each generation repeats the pattern of previous ones, producing nothing that's genuinely new. Verses 9 and 10. Some things may seem new, but that's only because we've forgotten the past. And the future that now seems so exciting will itself soon be the forgotten past. Being forgotten is an important theme in the book, one of the things that makes life vanity. Yet at the end of the book, the preacher concludes that God remembers everything, even those things humans have forgotten, giving a root to true meaning in life. The climax of this opening poem is verse 8. The repetitive nature of life is wearisome and tedious. Yet just as the sea never tires of receiving the water of the rivers, so our eyes and ears are not filled up with the sights and sounds of their experience. The preacher often makes provocative statements that are designed to cause his hearers to think and reflect. If everything is meaningless, why is there such order to nature? Why do our senses seem designed for a world that is better ordered than our present experience under the sun? The preacher doesn't answer all those questions, leaving them hanging for us to ponder. The second poem is even more provocative than the first. Wisdom, chokhmah, is a prized possession in the book of Proverbs, something to be searched for like hidden treasure in Proverbs 2. Yet the preacher wants to show us that even the most insightful human wisdom has limits to it and cannot answer our deepest and most profound questions. Wisdom is a royal pursuit in the book of Proverbs. See Proverbs 8, 15 and 16. So the preacher depicts himself as a king over Israel and Jerusalem. Verse 12. Now that description really only fits three people: David, Solomon, and Rehoboam. And it's clear that Solomon best fits this description, 1 Kings 4:34, though once again the writer does not make that specific identification. By his acquisition of wisdom, he sought to explore all that is done under heaven, verse 13. And his conclusion was that God had assigned an unhappy business, ESV, literally an evil task, to the sons of Adam, Bnei Ha'adam, verse 14. The ESV's children of man is a legitimate translation of Bnei Ha'adam, but it does obscure the reference to the effects of the fall that are pervasive throughout the book. All of mankind's occupations are hevel, striving after wind, an apt image for an impossible and frustrating task. Verse 14. Our world is broken and cannot be fixed, not even by the wisest of human beings. We just don't have access to the necessary data, nor do we have the capacity to process it all. Verse 15. And this is not because there is no one in control of the universe, as modern atheists contend. Rather, it's precisely because God is in control of all things and has placed this world under his judgment. See Romans 8, 20-21. It's significant that the preacher only refers to God and not the Lord, the covenantal name of Israel's God, who is working all things together for the good of his people. Romans 8:28. Once again, he leaves that connection for us to make. As a result, the preacher's intensive study of wisdom, and its opposite, folly and madness, left him just as frustrated as his earlier study of the nature of the world. Verse 14 and 17. Both endeavors are nothing more than a striving after the wind, a fruitless attempt to grasp something that will inevitably slip between your fingers. Indeed, not only did his search for wisdom leave him frustrated, but he discovered the truth of the saying, with much wisdom comes much sorrow. Verse 18. The more he studied the world, the more he came to understand the painful reality of living in a fallen and cursed world. Yet once again, Kohelet's conclusions challenge you to think carefully about what he's saying. and they invite you to push back. After all, anyone who writes a book like Ecclesiastes is trying to impart a certain kind of wisdom to his readers, to help them to understand what he has learned. If acquiring wisdom only leads to pain, we should all stop reading right now. Yes, there is much that is frustrating and painful about trying to understand the sin-damaged world in which we live. But the pursuit of wisdom nonetheless enables us to think rightly about that frustration and pain, rather than simply living like brute beasts. And it's not as if folly protects us from pain and frustration in this life either. Application questions. 1. What's your first impression of the preacher? Do you find him cynical, pessimistic, realistic? Why do you think that? 2. Why does the preacher think this world is frustrating and incomprehensible? Do you agree with him? 3. Why is it important to understand the effects of the fall on this world? 4. How is the gospel good news for those who live in such a world? What are the limits on that good news?